The path to disclosure regarding UAPs has been a long one, going all the way back to Betty and Barney Hill, Bob Lazar, and even recently with David Grush. So what is disclosure? Why do we want it? And what will disclosure look like? I believe it only reasonable that we start off by defining disclosure and why it's so important, especially on this topic. Disclosure is defined as the act of making something known. What this means for us is to unveil all the information on the topic of UAPs, and by proxy, any info on non-human intelligence. Hopefully, sometime in the future, we get the disclosure that we sought for, even if we get an answer we might not like. The UAP phenomena, as we know it, started during the 19th century when individuals began to report flying ships in the sky. Despite getting its start, it was yet to become the phenomena we know today, until the summer of 1947, when the private pilot, Kenneth Arnold, had his own UFO sighting, claiming to have seen a string of 9 UFOs pass Mount Rainier, traveling at a minimum speed of 1,200 miles per hour.
But this man started the 1947 wave of sightings that swept the world when he claimed to have seen from his mountain rescue plane 9 disc-like objects, roughly 45 miles away, flying at a speed of approximately 1,500 miles per hour near Mount Rainier, Oregon. The date? June 24, 1947.
If you're familiar with aircrafts today, you'll know that this isn't insanely fast, but was faster than anything at the time. These crafts were in a peculiar shape, that being a crescent, different from the typical saucers and tic tacs often seen in sightings. After Arnold's sighting would come the 1947 flying disc craze, which would cause a surge of activity that summer, with hoaxes and reports rising on July 4th, including Flight 105, Roswell, and the Rhodes photographs. It would begin to subside on the 7th, and many would speculate as to what caused the craze, whether it be new tech, misidentification, or mass hysteria. None of this really matters, at least when it comes to disclosure. What does matter is that the US government took a keen interest in the subject, creating Project Sign in 1978. The project, undertaken by the United States Air Force, sought to collect, evaluate, and distribute information on UFO sightings within the government as it may be a national security concern. According to Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt in a 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, Project Sign had produced the estimate of the situation, which pointed to an interplanetary explanation. There is no documentation that proves any of his claims, and Project Sign would eventually be shut down. After Project Sign's closure would come Project Blue Book, created in March 1952, and to no one's surprise, was run by the US Air Force. Similar to the other projects, Project Blue Book sought to study the UFO phenomena and all related data, as well as determine if it was a threat to national security. Edward J. Ruppelt would head the program, and was actually the one to coin the term UFO, believing it was a more accurate term. Ruppelt tried to get to the bottom of what was really going on with these UFOs, implementing various changes in pursuit of his goal. He would streamline how reports on UFOs were made, commission a standard questionnaire, and did his best not to lean towards any side, that being skeptics and believers, as he believed that's what divided and hindered progress in Project Sign. Under Ruppelt's tutelage, the project would investigate many reports, including the Lubbock Lights and the case over Washington, D.C. Ruppelt wouldn't remain with the project for its full duration, leaving for a temporary assignment in 1953. Upon returning, the project was a shell of itself, with more than 10 personnel down to 2. During the project's lifespan, a lot of different things happened, which I'll touch on. First was the Robertson Panel in July 1952, started by the CIA after a surge of activity. From the data collected in Project Blue Book, it was determined that these UFOs were nothing to be stressed about, as they could be explained by mundane objects. The conclusion would specify that many of these UFO reports were a waste of time, as they couldn't even verify many of them, and it hindered intelligence channels from actual reports. Therefore, it would be in the best interest for the Air Force to reduce the impact of UFOs on the public, which boils down to a campaign to ridicule and debunk the subject through psychologists, astronomers, celebrities, and even Walt Disney Productions. According to researchers, the panel was recommending controlling the public by propaganda and spying. They also believe the policies enacted influence Air Force policy on UFOs into the present day. An example of this was when the Air Force issued Regulation 200-2, which mandated that officers could only discuss UFO reports if it had been resolved. Everything unsolved was classified. The project would have several different heads who replaced Ruppelt, from Captain Hardin, Captain Gregory, and Major Quintanilla, all of which seemed to continue the anti-UFO propaganda. A notable example of the lengths they would go to dismiss any report comes from the Quintanilla era. During the summer of 1965, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol would report that Tinker Air Force Base was tracking a total of 4 UFOs, performing beyond the capabilities of any aircrafts of the time. Despite these UFOs being reported as going from 22,000 feet to 4,000 in seconds, Project Blue Book would determine that these UFOs were nothing more than a misidentification of Jupiter or bright stars. A clear wave of the hand disregarding what the witnesses saw, which would lead to obvious criticism over the project. Robert Reiser, director of Oklahoma Science and Art Foundation Planetarium, would state, "That is as far from the truth as it can get. These stars and planets are on the opposite side of the Earth from Oklahoma City at this time of year. The Air Force must have had its starfinder upside down during August. This should clear the air a bit by showing that the criticism the project received wasn't just from UFO enthusiasts, but from people who actually knew what they were talking about." Next comes the Condon Committee, a University of Colorado UFO project which sought to study the UFO phenomena, funded by the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1968. Run by physicist Edward Condon, where it gets its name from, alongside other scientists. You've probably picked up the pattern by now, but Condon believed that all of this UFO stuff was nothing but nonsense. Highlighted when the Lowe memo came to light, unveiling a potential plot by Robert J. Lowe, assistant dean of the university, to push for the study to come to the conclusion that these UFOs had no basis in reality. The committee would produce their final report in 1968, otherwise known as the Condon Report, which would showcase their findings. In the introduction, it is stated, "Our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge. Careful consideration of the record as it is available to us to conclude that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified in the expectation that science will be advanced thereby. It would then be recommended no further programs be created to investigate and study UFOs." Condon did specify that just because of the conclusion reached in this report does not mean there won't come a time where it should be investigated again. In total, the project had 12,618 reports, and only 701 of them were unidentified, and the project would be terminated in 1969. The news loved the report, but the academics and scientists were mixed on the results. After an incident in Michigan, Representative Gerald Ford decided to take things into his own hands and try to figure out what the hell was going on with these UFOs. A congressional hearing would be held in 1966 and 1969, but nothing substantial would come of this, and people would be waiting for a while before they could get any closer to a true answer when it comes to UFOs. Between the dates of 1969 and 2017, the US government would do little in terms of investigating UFOs, and it makes sense as to why. After all, most reports that came out disregarded the phenomena. In 2007, a secret program would be created, titled the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, also known as ATIP. The program was funded by the government and meant to study all things UFOs, later known as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, later unidentified anomalous phenomena, and from here on out, we'll use the term UAP. The program did a lot of work, according to Reed, stating in regards to what papers are public, most all of it, 80% at least, is public. Among other information was a 494-page report and several videos of UFOs from jets, released by Luis Elizondo, former director of the program. The program would last until 2012, having a 5-year run. It would end as ATIP, but it would continue under a different name, known as the UAP Task Force, forming in 2017. The New York Times publishes an article titled "Glowing Auras and Black Money: The Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program." The program in question was actually ATIP, which at this point was terminated. The article would go on to describe a craft that moved at a very high velocity with no signs of propulsion or means of lift. Also, according to the article, buildings in Las Vegas were modified to hold metal alloys and material from UAPs. Not only are these claims quite a shock, but the Pentagon would go on to verify the existence of the program, claiming the program ended in 2012, but Elizondo said otherwise. This article not only verified that the government had in fact been investigating UAPs for a number of years, unbeknownst to most, but apparently there is evidence to boot. We wouldn't see any of this UAP material, but we would get a look at some videos provided by the article. The videos, known as the gimbal and FLIR videos, appear to show actual footage of UAPs captured by Navy pilots. This wouldn't be the end of the story, as in an accompanying article titled "Two Navy Airmen and an Object That Accelerated Like Nothing I've Ever Seen," we would get further explanation for the FLIR video. In this article, we'd be introduced to Commander David Fravor, a former Navy pilot. The article doesn't go into full detail about the incident, but nonetheless, I'll be including some of the details left out. In 2004, Commander Fravor, alongside Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, went on a routine training mission off the coast of San Diego. What was a routine exercise would turn into quite the unusual one, as a radio operator informed the pair of unknown objects nearby that the Princeton had been tracking weeks prior. The objects appeared out of nowhere at 80,000 feet in the air, then descended all the way to 20,000 feet in the blink of an eye, a feat which conventional aircraft could not replicate. So with that, the pair were told to investigate the object. Closing in on the craft, there would be nothing but the clear sky. Upon looking down, Fravor would notice an object flying around a white patch of ocean which appeared to be erratic in its movements. The object, as described by Fravor, was white, about 40 feet long in an oval shape, which he called the Tic Tac for its resemblance to the breath mint. Descending to get a closer look, the UAP would ascend and begin to mirror the pilot's movements, before suddenly departing with acceleration like nothing they've ever seen. When the craft left, the pair would head back to their rendezvous point, which was 60 miles away from the location. To their surprise, the craft they were just pursuing was waiting at their rendezvous point, but upon arriving, it was gone. An hour later, after being told of the craft by Commander Fravor, a second group of pilots would investigate and record the FLIR video. We would have to wait a few more years for our next update. On May 16, 2019, in another New York Times article, wow, what is that? Navy pilots report unexplained flying objects. We'd be introduced to former Navy pilot Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who has a long list of credentials, including an engineering degree, development programs for DARPA, and the Office of Naval Research. According to Graves, there would be nearly daily sightings from 2014 to 2015 during training maneuvers off the aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt, as their old 1980s era radars were upgraded. One by one, each pilot would begin to notice these crafts, which were far more capable than theirs. Similar to Fravor's encounter, these crafts would accelerate to hypersonic speed and sporadically stop while making instantaneous turns. Graves would go on to discuss how these objects remained out there all day and would state, "Keeping an aircraft in the air requires a significant amount of energy. With the speeds we observed, 12 hours in the air is 11 hours longer than we'd expect."
Because we would see them being flat too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh gosh, I mean at altitude you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed, 40 miles per
So
hour.
they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind.
Correct.
How would something do that?
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind. It seems. You know, it just seems like it's just there in a way.
In late 2014, Graves, who was back at base, would notice a state of shock on one of his fellow pilots. The pilot would tell Graves, "I almost hit one of those things." The story goes that this pilot, along with his wingman, were flying about 100 feet apart over the Atlantic Ocean. All of a sudden, one of these UAPs would fly between the two, nearly hitting the pilot. The craft would be described as a black or gray cube encased in a clear sphere. The incident not only gave one of the pilots a heart attack, but made them realize that these crafts weren't actually part of some classified drone program, but a potential danger. We would get another video called "Go Fast," showing a video of a UAP. The UAP in the video appears over the ocean and has no obvious signs of propulsion. Fravor and Graves have since received massive support due to their credibility and even made an appearance on a number of different podcasts. In 2020, the Pentagon would officially release the 3 videos. I would like to add that the number of sightings by these training ranges may in fact be inflated, as most people don't exactly have a radar or aircraft flying around to investigate these objects. On June 25, 2021, we would get the preliminary assessment, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, also known as the UAP report or the Pentagon UFO report. The report was mandated after the Senate Intelligence Committee included a provision with the Intelligence Act for fiscal year 2021. This provision would require that the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense work on a report which would submit an assessment of the potential threats of UAPs. The report would look at 144 incidents involving UAPs going all the way back to 2004. 143 of the 144 incidents couldn't be identified, with the reported 18 incidents displaying unusual characteristics. These UAPs appear to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. The characteristics displayed were the exact same that Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Graves had described. The report would go on to say that there are more than likely multiple explanations for UAPs, and that indeed, UAPs were a potential threat to national security. The report would also stress that limited data would make it quite a challenge to evaluate UAPs. In order to increase their future findings, there would need to be an increase in investments in reporting. Entering 2022, we would also get our first hearing on UAPs in over 50 years, held by the United States House Intelligence Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Counterintelligence, and Counterproliferation. The hearing would start off by stating that these UAPs pose a potential threat to national security and that the stigma around the subject had gotten in the way of analysis of the problem. They would also criticize the Pentagon for failing to find a director for the recent Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, previously known as the UAP Task Force. Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray would open up by stating, "Since the early 2000s, we've seen an increasing number of unauthorized or unidentified aircraft or objects in military-controlled training areas, and reports of sightings are frequent and are continuing." It would be revealed that other countries had similar reports of UAPs, so it wasn't just the US observing the phenomena. They were then introduced 2 UAP videos. One shows a spherical object quickly flying by, while the other one shows a triangular craft through a set of night vision goggles. This would go on to showcase that while some of these incidents could be explained, others could not. In the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA 2022, we find a provision which would require the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence establish an office which would succeed the UAP Task Force. On July 20th, 2022, the Department of Defense would establish the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or the AARO. If it wasn't obvious already, they were to continue the collection and reporting of UAPs and related information. They would end up putting Dr. Sean M. Kirkpatrick as a director, who has had quite the career, but would come under heavy scrutiny during his time with AARO. Under Title 50 of the United States Code, Section 3373, we can also see the stipulation of an annual UAP report from the Director of National Intelligence and Secretary of Defense for 4 years. We would get that report in early 2023, which covered 510 cataloged reports, primarily from the US Navy and Air Force. 171 of these would display unusual flight characteristics, and they would also find that many of these UAP reports occurred in restrictive and sensitive airspace. On May 31st, 2023, Kirkpatrick would give opening remarks in front of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. In response to a few questions, Kirkpatrick would say that the US military personnel have been observing metallic orbs, and they have appeared all over the world. On April 19th, 2023, Kirkpatrick would find himself again facing the crowd, testifying in front of the US Senate Committee on Armed Services. According to Kirkpatrick, there is no credible evidence of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics. Yet, he would admit that a small percentage of UAPs display signatures that can be described as anomalous. Kirkpatrick would then present a video of an MQ-9 Reaper from the Middle East, which appears to show no signs of propulsion. He would then note that there still isn't enough data to make an accurate assessment. Another pivotal step forward is more whistleblower protections when it comes to UAPs. Within the NDAA 2023 and the corresponding Intelligence Authorization Act, provisions for reporting UAPs were added, and additional whistleblower protections. These additional protections would open the path for anyone wanting to come forward that was too scared previously for fears of any repercussions. This leads us to our most recent whistleblower. The whistleblower goes by the name David Grush. Before we start on any of these claims, let's first discuss what is a whistleblower and how come Grush is able to come forward without any repercussions, unlike Snowden. Well, to start, the definition of a whistleblower is an individual within an organization who sees the problem that is going uncorrected and comes forward to bring these problems to light. Who is Grush, and why should we care about him? Grush is a former intelligence official, a decorated veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. Most importantly, serving as the NRO's representative to the UAP Task Force from 2019 to 2021. Grush would inevitably resign from his position in April 2023 and come out with his story on the website The Brief in June of that same year. Throughout the article and subsequent interviews, Grush made a variety of claims. I'll be stating the claims I found most interesting in no particular order. Grush would speak of a secret UAP recovery program, which was in fact hidden from the UAP Task Force and Congress. He would then file a disclosure of urgent concerns, complaint of reprisal in 2022. He would claim that the government had secret programs with the sole focus on UAPs, whether that be recovery, reverse engineering, or the collection of materials recovered from the wreckage of these crafts. What I found the most interesting were his claims that these crafts came from non-human intelligence, and the programs involved were covered up. To add a cherry on top, Grush would say that the government actually had bodies from these extraterrestrials recovered from the wreckage of these crashed UAPs. If we believe Grush's claims, then it calls into question how long these aliens have been on Earth. These alleged secret programs were held away from public and Congress without any oversight, which is one of the reasons Grush came forward with his information and subsequently left his position on April 7, 2023. It's worth noting these claims actually weren't first-hand accounts from Grush. Much of this information came from interviews with people who did have knowledge on these programs. After coming forward, Grush's disclosure of urgent concerns would be deemed credible and urgent by the Inspector General of the intelligence community. This basically means that the Inspector General believed what Grush spoke of was credible. Little over a month later, on July 26, 2023, a bipartisan congressional hearing would be held by the House Oversight Committee on the topic of UAPs. This hearing would be spun on by Grush's claims and the increased interest by the public. For those of you that don't know, Congress hearings are typically a meeting of a committee or subcommittee to take testimony in order to gather information and opinions on proposed legislation, to conduct an investigation, or review the operation or other aspects of a federal agency/program. After a hearing, you'll often find legislation passed to rectify any problems or wrongdoing. In the hearing, we would hear testimony from David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and David Grush, previously coming forward under publication, but now in front of thousands and under oath. There's quite a bit that they covered during the hearing, which lasts around 2.5 hours, so I'll be covering the most interesting points from the hearing. First on the list is transparency, or more like the lack of it. This was one, if not the biggest point during the hearing. According to Grush, there were cover-ups of special access programs which focus on the recovery and reverse engineering of these crafts. Crafts which, according to him, were of non-human intelligence, in which dead pilots were recovered from the wreckage of crashed UAPs. Grush would also specify that in an attempt to hide these programs, people were harmed and even faced retaliation, including himself. Prior to the hearing, Congress would try to get into a skiff with Grush to get all the classified info he had. A skiff is essentially a private hearing where no one could eavesdrop on them and classified information could be provided. Grush in the hearing would say that indeed he would be able to get into a skiff because according to him, he did have the correct clearance. Congress, upon requesting access to these programs, would be shut out and denied access. The reasoning for this was that they lacked the necessary clearance to access these programs. Fravor and Graves would recall their encounters with UAPs. All three would agree they pose a national security threat. This doesn't mean they are hostile, more so that we have no idea what these things are, with the need for more data on the topic and transparency before we can truly understand what is going on. The skiff, Grush, and the committee discussed would never come to light, as contrary to what he said in the hearing, he did not have the correct clearance for such a meeting. The hearing for the most part came to the conclusion that there is a need for more transparency and oversight over these programs. What will come from this Congress hearing, and why is it so important? If these UAPs are to be taken seriously, they need to be put in a professional setting. Doing so would destigmatize the topic, increase reports without fear of repercussion, and increase interest from the public. Within the NDAA 2024, we find pushes to do so, relating to declassifying records on UAPs, titled the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. In the time following the hearing, additional laws were introduced with protections to whistleblowers coming forth about UAPs and required reports from AARO on their findings. With the passing of the hearing and additional measures on UAPs, many were waiting for any substantial update or even disclosure. We wouldn't get any disclosure, but we have seen a number of things happen, including an apparent smear campaign on Grush meant to discredit his character. The article, written by Ken Klippenstein on The Intercept with the title UFO Whistleblower Kept Security Clearance After Psychiatric Detention, it essentially characterized Grush as unreliable due to his previous history with PTSD. Ken would later admit, "I'm a national security reporter, so I know people that do the UAP stuff, and there is UAP retrieval." In 2023, Mexico claimed to have an alien body in their possession, but was nothing more than a hoax. NASA released their own report on UAPs and named a director for UAP research, with the report pointing out the lack of data on the subject and that the UAP activity they investigated seemed to display no connection to non-human intelligence, but didn't rule it out. In December, the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023 would be changed when two major provisions would be gutted from the act. That being the eminent domain clause, which would give the government eminent domain over all non-human technology and over privately held UAPs. The second provision to be cut was the establishment of an advisory panel with members chosen by the president who would have sorted through records which would be disclosed. During January 2024, Thomas A. Monheim, the Inspector General who found Grush's claims as urgent and credible, held a classified briefing with the House Oversight Committee on UAPs. However, members were still frustrated and felt as if information was being withheld. In March 2024, the AARO would release their UAP report. The report would declare that no government, academic, or review panel have found any evidence of any of the UAP sightings coming from extraterrestrial activity. Also that the AARO assesses that alleged hidden UAP programs either do not exist or were misidentified authentic national security programs unrelated to extraterrestrial technology exploitation, with the claims of such programs largely the result of circular reporting in which a small group of individuals have repeated inaccurate claims they have heard from others over a period of several decades. In plain speak, people would claim a source from someone or something that had unreliable information, thus pushing unreliable information. The source of the information gathered goes all the way back to the 40s, which includes, but is not limited to, Project Saucer, Sign, and Blue Book, as well as recent investigations held by the previous iterations of AARO. Most recently, in April 2024, AARO would release a document on a proposed special access program titled Kona Blue. To be clear, Kona Blue was merely proposed and never actually received any funding or materials. If the program was only proposed, why are we even talking about it? Shouldn't we focus on something more substantial? Before we get there, let's talk about what the project even sought to do. The project came forth from the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program / Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and sought to collect, identify, and analyze sensitive materials and technologies which induce AAVs, or Advanced Aerospace Vehicles. Furthermore, Harry Reid and Joe Lieberman wanted to create a framework and governance structure with congressional oversight on the project. This would have been in contrast with the secret programs we previously spoke about that lacked any oversight. Kona Blue would be shut down by the Department of Homeland Security, with Grush saying the program was killed after a hostile reaction from the CIA. Most people point their finger at the DHS. Discussing the project, Dr. Kirkpatrick, former head of AARO, would state, "We had several interviewees come in who named Kona Blue as the program that was housing the reverse engineering and non-human intelligence bodies of these crafts, and that is absolutely not the case." Since then, Kirkpatrick has left his role and was replaced by Tim Phillips. George Knapp, a popular figure in the UAP community, would have some problems with Kirkpatrick's statement, stating, "Does Dr. Kirkpatrick assume that everyone other than himself is a total nitwit? No witness who spoke to AARO could possibly have confused what they saw with their own eyes with anything associated with Kona Blue, since, after all, Kona Blue never existed. It never had a budget, never had a building, never had any crash saucer debris or ET bodies, because Kona Blue was not a real program. It never got beyond the planning and proposal stage, and only a handful of people ever knew it had been discussed, let alone knew what its scope would have been had it been greenlighted. Any witness who told AARO about crash retrievals and hardware was referring to something other than Kona Blue. Disclosure is a bit of a mixed bag, and we are still quite far from getting the answers to all of our questions, such as, are these UAPs of non-human intelligence, or are they from some secret government project? Are these extraterrestrials, if they do exist, benevolent or malevolent? I hope from the video you at least understand a little bit more about what is going on as we hopefully head to full disclosure. There is still a continual push for more answers, notably from the Oversight Committee who held a hearing with David Grush, Ryan Graves, and David Fravor. I'm sure more information will come to light and things in this video may change. Since disclosure is quite a big topic, you may feel that I misrepresented, mistook, or left out important pieces of information, so feel free to let me know in the comments. Thanks, bye.